Why do you want them to listen to your podcast?
So that when they think about starting a business, they've got the content that is pointing them in the right direction.
That is such a valuable piece of advice there.
The change in mindset makes a massive difference.
Welcome to Aussie Lawn Stars.
Welcome to the dungeon, Dirk.
Thanks very much. Back again for a second round.
It's been a little while.
It certainly has.
I'm trying to think. It's probably been 2.5, maybe more than that.
Yeah, I think it was late 23, wasn't it? Around about there.
Okay, so yeah, so a little bit less than 2 years then, somewhere around that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So last interview when we talked, things were a lot different than what they are now. You were closing up your landscaping division, focusing on maintenance.
Yep.
So maintenance being lawn mowing mostly and some gardening work. And you were starting your robotic mower division.
True. Yep.
So that's going back a little while now.
Yes. Yeah, lots changed. A lot of water under the bridge since then. Yep.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing would be you don't do any maintenance at all now, do you?
No. Finished that, wound that up just before Christmas last year.
Okay, and we're going to throw Andrew under the bus here. Andrew Chomix. Andrew, you need to come on here and do an interview with me, mate.
I've been telling you.
So he's taken over all of your maintenance work, right?
Most of it, yeah. So Andrew used to work for me. We still talk regularly, give each other a wave when we're passing. So when I was looking at getting out of it, I was looking at a few options, but he was my sort of first port of call who I asked. Gave him my list of jobs, the frequencies, what the income was, and he took over the majority of those commercial jobs.
And I've seen his rig recently on social media. It's looking pretty good. He's gone to a fair bit of effort to try and have a nice professional look and make sure he's doing a good job.
Yep. No, I believe that's brought him a lot of work as well. Just having that professional rig that's written, sign written, that definitely helps you stand out from the cowboys and the fly-by-nighters.
I just need to convince him that people want to hear from him so that I can get him in the dungeon.
Yep. One of the other guys I work with is Corey Barnes.
Oh, yes.
So he took on a couple of my jobs as well down in the Southern Highlands.
Yep.
They've been going well for him. One of the properties has just sold, so he might not be getting the ongoing for the new owners, but the other property across the road, he just messaged me yesterday that they're giving him some more work and getting him to do some project work, and so that's going well for him.
Nice. And I interviewed Corey Barnes last year.
Right. Yep. Yeah. No, he's going well. Got a growing business, and yeah.
Awesome. So that's cool. And you got out of maintenance because you wanted to focus on the robots, right?
Yeah. Look, it came to a point last year. Spring last year was insane. Obviously, it's peak mowing season. Robotic mowing, it's the same thing. It's seasonal. When it's winter time, like as we're coming into now, people aren't really thinking about mowing their lawn, so a robot mower isn't top of mind.
Yep.
And I knew I couldn't keep going for another year and do another spring trying to manage both companies.
Yep.
For me personally, when I do something, I want to do it properly. So I definitely wasn't doing justice to the maintenance business and giving it the attention it needed. And obviously, I'm approaching half century. Got to think about what's the future. Do I want to keep doing maintenance or do I want to focus on the robotics? And obviously, the robotics was a clear winner there. So,
yep,
that's the way it went.
You and I are very similar in age, I think. So, my grey's coming through my face a little bit.
Yeah, same.
I'm Gary Ashton, and I'm here to help business owners succeed and enjoy being in business. Does running your business feel chaotic? Maybe you started it for freedom, to live the life you wanted, but now you're stuck in the grind, overwhelmed and exhausted. The stress doesn't stop. You work harder, but nothing really changes. Get real support at Think Tank Coaching. Get crystal clear on future goals, your ideal customers, and the numbers to focus on that will move your business forward. If you're ready to make a change, let's talk. Book your free strategy session now at thinktankcoaching.com.au. Now you're only focusing on the robotic mower business, but you do sell a couple of other tool brands that give you a bit of foray into the mowing and landscaping businesses.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So Crest, I do both the robots and their commercial tools. We were using the Crest tools on the back end of DBY property maintenance, and we really, like those tools, and they were very powerful. The fast charging was obviously a big bonus. So yeah, I've definitely got experience, from both ends of using the tools commercially and then being as a salesman, as a dealer.
Well, let's take a quick dive down that Crest rabbit hole, if you don't mind. I want to do an interview with Crest, so by all means, we can just leave it and come back to the robots. But I'm curious how you find Crest by comparison to other brands that you've used.
Like I said, power was pretty crazy how powerful it was.
Yeah.
In terms of brush cutters.
What other brands are we comparing to?
So we, in the maintenance business, we were using Still and Ego.
Okay,
Still
so Ego was in battery only.
Yes, Still was battery as well.
Yeah, okay.
So since basically 2021, I think we were pretty much, for all hand tools, we were exclusively battery.
Yeah, okay.
So we've gone with the Still platform, the AP batteries, the backpack batteries, mostly because we were doing commercial work or acreage work.
Yep.
So we needed that longer runtime.
Yeah, for sure.
So we used that pretty much up until the end, burned through a few batteries.
Yep.
And yeah, that sort of is where Crest started to look very attractive because of the long warranty time on the batteries, the high cycle time that's covered under the warranties.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So comparing those three brands, I've used Still, but not with their battery gear. I've done a brief trial with some of their battery gear, and I've recently been down to Still's head office and had a bit of a play with some of their newer battery gear, which is pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah.
But I predominantly use Husqvarna and Ego, and I would say comparing Husqvarna to Ego is night and day because Husqvarna make lightweight battery tools even in their commercial range, whereas Ego are a little bit on the heavier side. But I would say Ego and Still are probably comparable in terms of the weight with a lot of their tools.
Yeah, probably, yeah. The Ego, and I didn't have the latest range in the Ego, so I can't speak for that. But
yeah, okay.
We were using Still on the main crew, and then when we were running a second crew, or if I was going out doing a couple of jobs a day, then I was using the Ego, and it was very much the backup. We wouldn't use it all day long, say an Ego whipper.
Yeah, okay.
Because you were burning through batteries big time. We only had the small batteries, and it just wasn't quite as powerful.
Yeah, and I think going to the newer Ego commercial tools, you'll find the power is there. Probably still want to go to a backpack battery if you really want the long run times, though, because any platform, it's so typically with a battery that's attached to the tool, you're talking relevant information, sort of 250 to 300 watt hours in a battery that is a cartridge going into the tool.
Yep.
And I think that's across most brands. I think Poulenc and Crest might get slightly more power into one of their cartridge batteries at a little bit more weight, maybe.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. I'd have to check the specs, but
yeah, I think my biggest battery on the Husqvarna gear might be like just over 300 watt hours. So it's interesting to compare. You go to a backpack battery and you can be talking 15 or 18 watt hours.
Yeah.
By comparison.
Yeah. And it's when you're doing that commercial work or that acreage work and you're going out whipping for 2-3 hours, in one stretch, you don't want to be changing batteries every 30-40 minutes.
Yeah, definitely. And it's what a lot of people do, though. They will run the cartridge batteries, and by my best estimation, most brands, if you're running cartridge batteries for a single person, you probably want between 5 and 10 batteries to get through a day. And that, I know that's a big variation, but it depends on how much work they're aiming to get done and the brand to some degree. But most people, I would say, are going to use upwards of 6 batteries in a day if they are relying on batteries for their hand tools.
Minimum, yeah. We with the Still AP gear, we were running the backpack batteries, and we had 3 backpacks on the trailer, 3 backpack batteries, and we would use all 3, plus we had solar and we were charging on the go as well. So
there you go.
Yeah, that was with a crew of 2.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. And I guess acreage work, some of that can be a little bit more intense on some of those tools.
Yeah, definitely. And just for us, it made sense because of the extended. By the time if you're just running a cartridge battery and you've got to walk 300-400 meters back to the vehicle to go and change batteries, that's time out of your day that you're not on the tool.
Definitely. So it makes a big difference for people for most people, it's going to make a big difference. But I prefer cartridge batteries rather than backpack batteries just because of the ick factor of all the sweat and everything going on. But I guess it also comes down to is that backpack battery going on the same person every time rather than getting swapped around between people as well? Is it getting cleaned down every now and then?
Yeah, look, we didn't. We were happy to swap. I mean, we're all males on the crew, but we're happy to swap around.
Yep.
The later steel batteries, you did have the possibility to just pull that actual cartridge off the backpack harness.
Okay, yeah.
So we did do that from time to time just to cycle through the batteries to make sure they were getting used evenly.
Yeah.
With Crest, that is basically it is very easy. It's just a push button on the top. You pull the whole battery out and you put it on the charger.
Yep. Now, one of the things I've seen come along with these issues is that you might find setting up a crew with enough batteries and tools, you might spend 12 grand just to get something set up so that it's got enough invested in that trailer, that vehicle, so that you can go out and do it. I think if you're going to Crest, you might spend a little bit more, particularly if you're going for the onboard battery charging station. You might be up around the $18,000 mark instead of $12,000 mark. That's from what I can gather. But it gives you
the big cyber tank, which is their big, which is just really designed to be in a shed, like for a big crew, which is what gives you your 8-minute recharges. But even their standard 30 amp charger is very quick. It will charge your batteries in around 12 minutes. And the big advantage with Crest is you'd need less batteries because you can, other than the backpack blower, with every other tool, you cannot use the power as fast as you can charge it.
Okay, so the backpack blower will drain that battery really quickly.
If you're on full power, full trigger, yes, you will drain that backpack battery.
Yeah, you're making me curious now.
I've got to do a test one day. I want to do a recording, and just have a timer running, and just put an elastic band around the trigger and just keep it going until it runs flat, and then compare the charging. So a backpack battery, we're talking about the red ones here, you will charge in about 20 minutes on their sort of standard charger.
Yeah.
And you'll, from what I've sort of used, if you went flat out, full bore, full trigger, you're talking between 15 and 20 minutes runtime on the blower. Obviously, if you have the cyber tank, which is their top of the line charger, you will charge that backpack battery in 8 minutes. So in that case, you still couldn't use it faster than you can charge it.
Now, this is relevant for people. If you're running a solo crew doing residential work, just ignore this section because you're not going to need the power of the backpack blower. Even if you want it and you buy it, you still don't need the amount of power it can deliver for the duration that you might want. So if you go to Still's BR800, which is a good comparison, petrol-powered backpack blower that delivers somewhere around 35 newtons of power for an hour runtime.
Yep.
That's what I look at for people who are doing commercial work or acreage work. Having the backpack blower that's petrol will keep up blowing full power, full noise for an hour runtime. I've tested a couple of backpack blowers that are battery, and most of them struggle to get past that sort of 15 to 20 minute runtime when you're talking full noise. But that's getting up around the between 26 and 32 newtons of force. Which I think is the most relevant ratio that we're comparing. Like if you're talking metrics that make a difference to a blower and how effective it is. That is interesting for people doing acreage where they're blowing down a long driveway, commercial where they're blowing out a car park or something like that, and you want a full hour runtime, then the petrol option is still ahead of battery options. But having a cyber tank where you can recharge in 8 minutes gives you the option to do it with battery.
Yep. And obviously there is one battery. I'm just looking at the Crest website right now. There is one battery which will give you around about they say about 40 minutes of runtime on the blower.
Yeah.
Which is their cyber capsule. So it is 1,500 watt hours.
Yep. That's a lot.
And yeah, it's not a lot heavier than the 660 watt hour red battery, but it will definitely, if you're doing a lot of blowing, you'd want to be using 2 of those batteries. That would get you're cycling through them, you would get a full day's work, no problem.
Yeah, and obviously when you're cycling through 2 batteries just back to back, full power consumption, you're going to end up doing damage to batteries because of the amount of power consumption that's going in and out of that battery really quickly. Crest warrant that because they say they're capable and they're able and they can do a lot of cycles like it.
Correct. They will warrant it for 3,000 cycles, which is a lot of runtime.
Yeah. Now, most batteries will suggest that they are good for around 1,000 cycles, most battery brands. And again, that's dependent on how hard you abuse the batteries, and the more heat you pump through that battery, the more current draw when you're discharging or charging, the more impact it has on that cycle count.
Yep.
So that is interesting, and I'm hoping I'm going to get in touch with Crest soon. I'm going to ask them if I can actually spend a bit of time on their tools and then do an interview with them so we can talk more in depth about that. But it's cool to talk to you about it, given your experience, and you are a reseller from them. Yeah.
Yep. Just while we're going down the Crest rabbit hole. So that cyber capsule battery that I just mentioned, 1,500 watt hour, that has a dual purpose. You can actually use that as a charging supply. So there is a DC to DC charger that you can throw on the back of the ute. On the one side of it, you can put this cyber capsule, and it will charge 6 of the smaller batteries that you use on your whippersnipper. So you could get through a fair chunk of the day with one of those batteries, and then a couple of the smaller ones, and just keep charging them without needing to plug into your customer's power or looking for a power point.
Yeah, so that raises a topic which I want to talk about, and the issue of whether it's worth investing a lot of money in batteries. And obviously for you made that choice to do it, to run all battery on your handheld tools. A lot of people will sit there and go, okay, if I'm investing in batteries for a team of 2 people, I'm probably spending anywhere from $3,000 through to $10,000 in batteries alone just to make sure that I've got what I need. If you're going down that Crest route, the Cyber Tank, the big one, and then several of those batteries. What do you call the white ones?
Cyber capsule.
So the Cyber capsule, that's the white one. That's their highest power delivery one that they have.
Yes.
If you buy, say, 3 or 4 of those, but let's go with 4 of them plus the Cyber Tank on a truck, you're spending a fair bit of money on battery.
Yes.
What I would...
just to hold you up there, the Cyber Tank is not aimed at someone who's a 1 or 2 man crew. That is not the target market at all.
It's not, but people are considering whether it's worthwhile.
Yeah, but it is intended for a green by nature landscape solutions. Those sort of guys who are on a large commercial site. They have a maintenance shed, where they park their vehicles. They would keep that in that maintenance shed, and then have a few of the batteries they would just take out on the ATV with them when they go out to the work area. Yeah,
so that's the ideal situation for those. A lot of people are still going to consider, can I put that on the back of a truck or a big trailer? Practically speaking, if you're adding that weight, that size onto a trailer, it takes up a fair bit of space.
Yep, and weight, which obviously comes into consideration when you're towing trailers, the weight of that Cyber Tank itself is 140 kilos.
Yeah, it's noticeable.
Yeah.
Yeah. But on the financial side of things, a lot of people will be balking at spending $10,000 to $20,000 on batteries, let alone the tools.
Yep.
And I heard a figure of like for a solo person to get set up with Crest tools to just do the basics that they need without going down the cyber tank, or maybe I don't know if it was including the cyber tank. They were talking about $18,000 compared to $12,000 with Palanque, and maybe a little bit less if you go for Ego or Husky or Still or Bushranger. I got to try and remember all the brands.
Yeah.
So what I think is valuable there, and your input's important here because you've got that experience on that side of it. If you're running a 2-person crew, you're probably chasing somewhere between $200,000 and $450,000 turnover on that crew, running 5 days a week, normal days.
Yep.
So out of that $200,000 to $400,000, big variation, but there will be that much variation in our industry. You're going to have wages, and I'm going to say bare minimum, you've got $120,000 a year in wages. And if you're paying a 2-man crew to do a decent job, you're probably paying close to $200,000 in wages, and then you want to be making obviously more than $200,000 on that crew to make it worthwhile.
Yep.
By comparison to spending with a 2-man crew, you might buy a $30,000 zero turn. You might spend $10,000 on hand tools. So if you're throwing into the equation spending $12,000 on battery gear, or even up to $20,000 on battery gear, so that they don't have to spend time going to the petrol station, mixing 2-stroke fuel. They're still going to need fuel for their ride-on mowers unless you go down the expensive route of a Mean Green or a Gravely electric ride-on. There's a few other ones coming in now. Greenworks got some nice ones.
Yeah, they do.
But in terms of your overall costs, once you've bought your batteries, you reduce your fuel costs a lot. So
Absolutely.
It's not going to suit everyone, but those are numbers that are interesting for people that are considering it.
Yeah, look, it's fuel. You're saving on fuel, and I think people, when they're looking at battery, they see the upfront cost, but it's that daily or every second day trip to the servo to go and fill up your jerry cans. That is the ongoing cost that people don't really realize how much they're spending on fuel.
I measure it. I put all my equipment fuels into zero in a different item code to my vehicle fuel, and I don't run battery hand tools. I run a backpack blower that's I do run battery hand tools. I don't run battery in my backpack blower, and I don't run battery on my mowers. So I think you'll find you hit $3,000 to $4,000 a year in fuel savings fairly quickly. And a 2-person crew, it could be $5,000 to $10,000 in fuel savings alone.
Easily, yeah. And
but
then
the saving in time,
your servicing costs that you're not having. That's another big one.
Yeah, so savings in time, saving in servicing costs, and you're getting more bang for your buck with the wages, which is the biggest cost in that 2-person setup.
Yep. Crest will actually, I don't have access to it, but Crest head office, their state managers, if there's a landscaper that's really keen to look at the platform, they have an ROI calculator which they'll run through with you and look at what your existing equipment is, what you're expending at the moment, and they will demonstrate in hard, cold facts what you will actually save over, say, a 5-year period.
A lot of people don't trust those ROI calculators, and they're like, oh, no, that doesn't take into account a bunch of different factors, and I don't trust it. So when I do get a hold of Crest, I'll pin them down and ask them some details on that and see what the numbers look like. Yeah,
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Dirk, we didn't get you in to talk just about that. It's been an interesting rabbit hole, and I wanted to do it. But the more interesting thing I wanted to talk about is with, I'm guessing, 3 years plus experience in robotic mowers. Probably 2 years of very solid experience, plus the extra year where you're just showing interest and getting ramped up to start doing it. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, well, Mowers Australia has been going for coming up to 3 years in August. So
coming up to 3 years. There you go.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's call it 3 years total, and it's pretty close to it now. When we first started doing this, I'd talked to a couple of different people about robotic mowers before I talked to you, and you were getting very interested, and then was like, all right, let's have a chat, do an interview with you. your breadth of experience and wisdom is huge by comparison to where it was back then. And that's why I thought it's worthwhile doing another interview with you.
Yep.
I also have some interesting perspectives on this, and I'll push you to make
Fair
sure
enough.
we're giving listeners valuable information about this at the moment.
Yep.
The,
Rather than just a sales pitch.
my opinion is that the majority of people listening are going to be contractors, or they're going to be thinking about being a contractor where they are doing the hands-on work as a maintenance person, lawn mowing, gardening, whatever else. They are not suited to buying robotic mowers for their work. There will be some that are, and those guys will be interested in it. But let's try and work out the difference and why that actually makes sense. So one of the things I first talk about is the fact that I use robotic mowers in commercial property maintenance, and they are an add-on to a zero turn or a push mower, all the gardening tools, all those sorts of things, and they reduce the amount of labour I spend on mowing. So from that point of view, that's a clear-cut winner.
Yep.
There's one person I've interviewed up in Queensland, Richard Hogan.
Yes.
He put 20 robotic mowers out on residential properties, and that's a rough estimate, 20 robotic mowers he put out, and that reduced his personal labour on those properties so that he spent less time there, still making similar sort of money on those customers to what he was doing before he put the robotic mowers there, but now with less time on the properties.
Yes.
That's an unlikely scenario for most contractors.
Yep. I would say there are a lot of contractors who are looking at that model, and I do get calls from time to time, but there's very few that have successfully managed to do it yet. To integrate robotics into their business.
So let's talk about the differences there, and I'll put forward some ideas. I'm curious as to your perspective, but I think you'll probably agree with me on this first one. The purpose of a robotic mower is to live in one place and do the same job over and over again. And a lot of contractors will be asking, can I buy?
Yes.
And you've got robots that sort of start to look interesting down this path. Can I buy one robot and transport it between more than one job so it's set up with maps for more than one job at a time?
Yep. And that is probably the most common misconception that we get asked from people who reach out. Is they say, I've got 10 customers. I want to bring the robot with me from job to job, and while it's mowing, then I'll do the whippersnipping, and then we'll go to the next job. But at the moment, in general, robots are designed to live on the one property. They are a lot slower than mowing with a push mower or a stander or whatever. So even if you were able to start it up at the time you arrived on the job, you would be finished your whippersnipping and everything long before the robot was. So then you'll be standing around waiting for it.
I think there's one or two exceptions here, and the difference being is that your average Husqvarna auto mower, sorry, I'll throw you under the bus, your Segway, your Luba, any of those brands, right? Your average robotic mower that is designed to stay in one place and mow the same place is designed to cut that same blade of grass around 2 to 3 times a week. And I recommend people go overkill and they buy one that is capable of doing that same blade of grass. So every blade of grass on the property every day of the week. So if it can do between 3 cuts a week and 6 or 7 cuts a week, that's what it's designed to do well. And by staying in the same place doing that regularly, you get a really nice lawn. The robot is not overworked, so it's going to last a decent amount of time. And that's where they sit for the most part. But if you look at an exception to that rule, the Wright ZK Autonomous is one that comes up. It's a same machine as a regular Wright ZK stand-on mower, but it's got the autonomous electronics built into it, so it can be operated without a person on it. That is capable of cutting the same area, similar frequency to what you already cut it. So once a week, once a fortnight sort of frequency. Even so, they are predominantly going to end up working in the same place, doing the same area over and over again, rather than, and they can have multiple maps in them, so you can transport it between one property and another and set it up and off you go. But predominantly, they're not designed to be transported regularly. They are designed to operate. And I think the FJ Dynamics, you sell FJ Dynamics.
Yep. Yeah, so FJ Dynamics is a battery brand, but similar sort of concept. Larger mower. Doesn't need to be out there cutting every day. Can do infrequently.
Yeah, so it can do once a week, once a fortnight. But again, it's being battery, it's still going to benefit from cutting grass as frequently as possible. The less
Oh,
it has to cut, the better the battery is going to get looked after.
yeah.
But you can put multiple maps in the computer for the FJ Dynamics mowers as well, so you can transport it between multiple
Yeah,
properties
you
if you
can,
want.
and you've got that 5-hour runtime, so you could get several acreage jobs done with that mower.
Yeah.
Transporting it, then just charge it up at night, for example.
Efficiency is the thing that rules a business and the decisions you make as a small business owner. Right Mowers give you the options in their product lineup to match efficiency with size, fuel usage, and the type of jobs you want to target, from catching to mulching or side discharge, from roadside verges to acreages and manicured lawns to 6 feet tall and super long. I've been using the Right Stander I 42-inch with a Catch Pro for manicured areas and the Stander ZK61 to maximise productivity for large open acreage mowing. If you need to replace your push mower, try the 32-inch Stander B. If you have more open access to residential properties, there's a 42 through to 48-inch option that suits you. And if you want to enter the acreage market, the 52, 61 and 72-inch machines have choices in engine size and model type to suit the work you want it to do. Right Standards go the distance, saving you time and money season after season. And one of the factors that comes up there with FJ Dynamics or even with the Right ZK Autonomous is without a human thinking about the direction that it's cutting, they're going to struggle with slopes.
Yes.
They are capable of doing some slopes. They will be rated to a certain degree of slope, but as people are well aware, if you're facing downhill on a skid steer zero turn mower and you're trying to do a U-turn, you're going to get wheel spin.
Yep. So that comes down to being smart and obviously not putting that mower on a property that has that, or adjusting your map so that it isn't trying to turn. And this goes for all robotic mowers, even the smaller ones, that you're not trying to turn on the slope. You're giving it a flatter area at the bottom of the slope where it can do its turn and then head back up or crossways or whatever way it is.
Now, good training when it comes to robotic mowers will address these issues about what they can do and where they work well, so that you focus on putting them where they work well rather than trying to push their limits.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of if you look at robotic mowers in general, the instructions will generally have 2 specifications for slope. The big number that everybody sees, say, for example, with the Luba is 38 degrees slope, and they think, wow, that's great, it can do a 38-degree slope. But the smaller number that you look at is you need to keep in consideration is what slope rating it can handle at the bottom edge of the lawn where it's actually doing its turning, and that's not 38 degrees.
Yes. And that's something to factor in when you go, okay, well, it's only got one bottom edge, but if you've got a Luba, that's going to work systematically compared to a robot that works random cut. Now, what that means is either of those options are still going to be turning on every edge of the property. So you're still going to find, even though you might only have one border that is at the bottom of the slope, you're still going to find all the way up all the other borders. There's going to be areas where you go, okay, that may have a problem turning without tearing the grass up and making a bald patch on your lawn.
Yep.
So going back to, are these good for contractors or not? There's a big part of this where you go, okay, there's a fairly small percentage of contractors or properties that contractors look after where a robot is a really good choice.
Yes.
So ideally, and this is what we want to highlight rather than the negatives, is that there are some positives there. There are contractors who might benefit from having a customer, residential size customer, where there's a robot that looks after the mowing and the contractor comes in and does the whippersnipping and the gardening. And often we're talking higher end customers there. Sometimes you might find it's not a higher end customer, but mostly it's going to be higher end customers where you'll find that they want you to be there frequently. So you might spend a whole day a week on a property like that and just doing the gardening while the robot does the mowing.
Yep. I've got a couple of contractors that are using robots. One in particular, he's sort of acreage properties, larger properties. He was telling me recently about one. I guess it's sort of commercial. It's an NDIS assisted accommodation facility. And so he's got a robot in there on a subscription basis, and he's actually set up his subscription. So, for example, he guarantees that the lawns will be cut once a week, even with a robot there. But his minimum service guarantee is 1 cut a week, because that way for him, if he's on the other side of town and the robot gets stuck for some reason, he doesn't need to drop what he's doing and go and return to that property ASAP to, get the mower going again.
Yeah.
Obviously, he said he could easily increase that service guarantee to 3 cuts or 4 cuts a week, but then his price would have to increase because he would have to place more priority on that, heading back to that property to make sure that he could fulfill that service guarantee if there was an issue with the robot that it got stuck on a tree branch or whatever.
What sort of robots are you using?
He's using quite a mix, actually. He's got a couple of Lubers. He's got a couple of Ukers, which are both Momotion products. He's also got a Segway Navimo.
Yep.
So, yeah, he's trialing them all.
Those brands are all aimed at residential size properties, varying in size from sort of 50 square metres through to maybe even a couple of acres possibly, but that's on the larger side for those robots.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So, and that works well for his business model.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So rather than setting up, I guess it's managing customer expectations, like in any business, rather than selling it as, hey, here's a robot that's going to cut your lawn 7 days a week. He sold it as, hey, here's a robot that's going to cut your lawn once a week minimum. If it does more, that's a bonus. But that saves him from having to go there every fortnight, and the lawn getting messy in between.
So the maths on this, and I don't know his numbers, I'm just making some speculations here, and we're not naming him anyway. If you've got a property like that, so you said NDIS type property where there's a service agreement to keep the property maintained. So by comparison to a residential property that's low end, where you might be somewhere around $1,500 to $2,000 a year service for that property, there's probably going to be a little bit higher. You're allowing for a robot that's worth between $2,000 and $10,000 on that property. And I'd say probably in the middle, not at that extreme.
Yeah.
The robot's likely to be in the middle of those prices. So you factor in the cost of the robot. That robot will give you a service life of 2 to 5 years, maybe more, maybe up to 10 years, but 2 to 5 years is quite reasonable.
Yep.
And so you're recovering the cost of the robot, spending time on the property, still doing the gardening and the edges, and providing a subscription service where the customer's quality of service is based partly on the robot and partly on the human interface.
Yep.
So I would suggest customers like this are going to be worth probably a minimum of $4,000 a year and upwards from there.
Yep. Sure.
But that is an interesting business model.
Yeah. No, I mean, you've put up the initial outlay of that machine, and you need to recover that as well as your time factoring in going and recovering, because that's another misconception, that robots are set and forget, that you can set it up and walk away, go for 6 months holiday, and your lawn will, when you come back, your lawn will look like a bowling green. Unfortunately, that's not always the case.
So on that note, I've been running robots for 3 years, and I'm just thinking in my head, looking at the ceiling, 3 years is pretty close. Okay. In that time, I have had to intervene with any of those robotic mowers, sometimes on a daily basis, but often it might be once a month that you need to just go out there and do something because the robot's stuck, or you need to check that it's charging properly, or need to change the blades on the mower. So it can vary between, if you've got a couple of issues that need resolving, could be on a daily basis, you might be there and stay there for a couple of hours trying to resolve a particular issue, or it might be once a month on average that you actually do some intervention with that mower.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and that is very dependent on the property.
Yes.
If you live on a nice, if you've got a nice rectangular patch of flat lawn, you have no trees that could drop anything on the lawn. Sure, you may end up, with a robot that you don't need to look at for 6 months, other than maybe changing some blades. But the reality in Australia is we have gum trees. They drop, gum nuts of varying sizes. They drop sticks. They drop bark. Properties, if there's kids, there's toys left on the lawn, hoses can get left on the lawn that the mower can get tangled in. So there is still always a human element to looking after a robot.
So there's a couple of factors that come up on this. One of them is the type of blades that a robot runs, and most robots will run a little swing back razor blade. So it's just an inch long and it's on a bolt that pivots around and it swings back and forth and cuts the grass as it spins around. So those blades typically have a service life of about 8 weeks.
Yeah, again, very, very variable. If you're running your mower 24/7, probably 4 weeks. I've got a customer who's got 5 robots, and I go there once a month and change all his blades.
Yep.
But those
I'd say
mowers
that
are running pretty much 24/7.
that is the highest frequency, because what I've found, I've done testing on a Segway over the last couple of years, and I've pushed that machine really hard. When you put it on a new property and it's pushed above and beyond its means, you'll actually wear out a set of blades in about 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. So it's pushed to its absolute limits. When that mower has been on the same property after the first blade change, I find I get close to 8 weeks out of a set of blades, maybe even 3 months.
Yeah.
But typically you get that variable between those, like you say, the 4 weeks or up to the 3 month mark of running a set of blades like that. There are a couple of robotic mowers that run a solid blade rather than the swingback razor blades. And again, you can still have some issues with those. So you still need to be able to check on them fairly frequently and make sure they're working well, make sure the height is good. The height of cut is an interesting one with robotic mowers, because the frequency of cut means you can get a really nice lawn while cutting it nice and short. And so often people will go for the lowest possible cut height on a lawn where your robot's working. And this lends itself really well to sports fields and golf courses, but also commercial properties where you want to know that it's looking spectacular all the time. The downside I've seen there is that because you can cut really low and you don't have the weight of a ride-on mower or even a push mower on the property, the actual ground moves differently. And so you'll find things like tree roots that might expose themselves occasionally, and the robot will get caught on a tree root, or a wire might get pushed up over a tree root and then get cut if you've got a wire in the ground. Nice when you're moving to a robot that doesn't need a wire in the ground, but you still have tree roots that they can get caught on.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And it's amazing how much those tree roots move when you've got a robot cutting 25 millimeters above the ground.
Yep, you really start to notice them. Yep.
Yeah, with a ride-on mower, and your typical push mower or ride-on cut is going to be probably 50 to 60 mil height of cut. There's not a lot of people that cut lower unless you're running cylinder mowers.
Yep.
I know that everyone wants to be able to cut 25 mil high lawns in Australia, but there's only a select few where that is really going to happen with contractors.
Yep, that's right. If you're doing fortnightly cuts with a ride-on, you're not cutting at 25 mil.
No, if you work off the cutting 1/3 off and you're doing fortnightly cuts, particularly up the east coast of Australia, you can have 12 inches of growth in a fortnight and more.
Yep.
You can't do 1/3 of the blade at a fortnightly cut. And you can't get 25 mil high lawn.
No, that's right. Yeah. You just mentioned wire in the ground there. So I think that's probably an interesting point to touch on since our last podcast, is how the technology has changed.
But 2.5 years ago, most of them were wire in the ground. It was unheard of to see the RTK or other methods of no wire in the ground.
It was, yeah. I listened back to that episode, and we were sort of estimating it'd be another 3 to 4 years before RTK technology was reliable enough. But we were a bit wrong there, because RTK has been around for coming up to 2 years now and is better than ever. And we haven't sold a wired mower. Haven't sold one for a good 18 months. I did install one about 6 months ago, which was sold by a mower shop to a staff member's mother, and they got a good deal on it being a wired mower, so I went and installed that for them. But as soon as RTK came out, nobody wanted a wired mower anymore.
And the cost of install for a wire is so high that it's prohibitive. So if you're buying a $2,000 robotic mower and you've got to put a wire in the ground, you could be easily spending $600 to $1,000 putting the wire in the ground on top of the cost of the $2,000 robot. So when you're talking an RTK mower, the customer is relatively easy. They're able to install it themselves rather than paying an installer to come out and do it. Some of them still require somebody like yourself to come out and install them. I think Crest require that as a brand.
Crest is definitely dealer install only, yes. But
Yep.
that's a way of them guaranteeing the installation and reducing, unsatisfied customers who
Yes.
maybe don't understand the technology or have chosen the wrong mower for the property. By specifying that it has to be installed by a dealer, that they get more control over that and make sure that the right product goes into the suitable property.
And this is recommended because of all those things we've just been talking about that can be issues for a robotic mower. So having somebody like yourself actually inspect a property or even do the install is a good thing, even if it's not a Cress, just to
Yeah.
make sure that it's going to give you a good service life and not actually do damage to your lawn because you haven't foreseen these issues.
Yep. Especially when you're talking the higher end products like the Cress, Husqvarna would be the same. When you get to the lower end of the markets, some of the Chinese brands, they're relatively inexpensive, simple to set up, and they're generally going to be used on a suburban lawn where there's maybe a couple hundred square meters of lawn. Probably not a lot you can do wrong, other than maybe getting your slopes wrong. But yeah,
Yeah. So if we talk about that for a moment, the ideal place to put a robotic mower, contractors are going to probably tune out a little bit on this, but it's still relevant because they'll be asking, can I do this? So the ideal lawn for a robotic mower is going to be like a round lawn, like a circle rather than a rectangle, because then in a rectangle, the corners become a bit of an issue. So nice, smooth, round edges, nice round oval with a easy place for the robot to charge and no obstacles in the lawn at all. And that's probably the ideal place where it's perfectly flat, of course.
yes, yes,
Once you add obstacles and a sharp corner becomes an obstacle, a tree becomes an obstacle, roots in the ground or paths on the lawn, like they can cross paths, but that still is an obstacle of some sort.
curved edges.
Yep. And you might have a relatively open lawn, but even two trees in the middle of that lawn essentially makes it less likely for the robot to go from the charging station past that point where the trees are. It works harder.
Yep.
And there's ways around that. You can program a robotic mower to start on the other side of the tree. So you go, okay, the first start, it starts from the base station. The second start, it travels along a border or through an imaginary path with RTKs directly over to the other side of the lawn and then starts mowing from there so that it gets a more consistent cut across all of its areas.
Yep. I mean, with RTK, you're going to get a consistent cut no matter where it starts. Because it is going systematically.
Yes.
That's probably the biggest difference that we've seen since wired mowers were phased out or lost popularity. Wired mowers ran around randomly. You had to run them for a lot of hours every day just to make sure they covered the whole lawn.
Yes.
With RTK mowers, they're going to mow up and down in straight lines across your lawn from one end to the other. They'll do a neat border cut around your obstacles, around your edges, and you'll get some striping as well. And they're just so much more efficient. So
now it's interesting you say that.
Less of a problem.
It's interesting because I've found with an RTK mower, you still want it to cut every blade of grass about 3 times a week. With a random cut, if you've got it operating 6 or 7 days a week, you're going to hope that it cuts every blade of grass about 3 times a week.
Yep.
So in terms of the overall work that it does, the RTK is more efficient because it's doing systematic mowing.
Yep.
But they still need to go out daily or every other day to get what you need out of it. And if you do less than that, I've found this particularly on lawns that are growing fast, East Coast, where you get, and we've had upwards of 500 mils of rain in the first few months of this year.
Yep.
You get insane grass growth. So if you're not cutting at least 3 times a week, then those little razor blades, when they get to the thick grass, they just swing back and don't cut. And so you'll get areas which are not cutting well if you don't cut it frequently enough. And sometimes I would say cut daily, so 6 or 7 times a week to get to the point where it's actually managing that insane grass growth.
Yep. My place here, I mean, I've got several robots running around, but they are working through the growing season. They're mowing 7 days a week. And I've only just in the last probably 3 weeks dropped them back to once every second day.
Yeah, same. So, I think that's important for people to understand that in terms of going, okay, the difference between them is there, but you're still going to work them pretty hard to make sure that they are giving you a nice lawn and not getting stuck.
Yep. The big difference compared to traditional mowing, where the contractor would come out or the homeowner would mow their lawn once a week, once a fortnight. The big difference is that robotic mowers are maintainers. They're not designed to reduce 100 mil lawn down to 30 mil. They are designed to just take 5 mil max off the top, just trim it consistently, keep the lawn at that same height. Maybe 1 to 2 days growth on it, but that's it.
Yeah. And if you're doing that, then the lawn is going to be higher quality turf than if you've got a contractor coming in even once a week and maintaining it.
Yep.
You're going to have a very nice lawn with a robotic mower looking after it.
Yep.
So it is worthwhile for people that are chasing higher end results, and I would equate this to cylinder mowing. People going for cylinder mowing are usually chasing a higher end result than somebody who's going for the cheapest option with a lawn contractor coming in once a fortnight, which still can provide decent results. But yeah, people go up in scale and go, okay, well, I want the bare minimum, or do I want something that's going to be the envy of the neighbours? And a robotic lawnmower gives you that finish that is enviable.
Yeah, it does. Yep, absolutely.
And yeah, again, goes back to if you're cutting once a fortnight and you're trying to make it stay green, then you've got to cut at 50 to 60 mils high, whereas with the robotic mower, you can keep that lawn nice and low and it will still be nice and green all year round.
Yep, absolutely.
So yeah, they are beneficial for that point of view, and they give an advantage on those lawns where people want to maintain a higher quality turf, and they might be throwing customers the options of a package with weed treatments, fertilizer, grub treatments, all the various different things that customer knows their lawn is going to be kept pristine all the time.
Yep, absolutely. There's still a lot of people that don't know about robotic mowers, don't know what they are and how they work, but there is definitely a growing acceptance of them. And I think that moving forward over the next few years, contractors are going to be asked more and more about robotic mowers and whether they can incorporate them into their regular maintenance. And it's the smart. I think it's the smart ones that do take on that technology and learn about it that will do well. We don't have the same legislation like in California where they're banning petrol equipment, that sort of stuff. But the time will come where pushing a petrol mower in a backyard will become unpopular just due to noise, fumes, that sort of thing. So
Yeah,
it's certainly the future. It's still some way off before it's mainstream, but we are heading that way.
Oh, that's interesting you say it that way. I would say for lawn contractors going, the robots are going to steal my jobs. And I think you see that mentality on LMCA and places where contractors commune. They see a robotic mower in somebody's lawn and they laugh at it, and they especially laugh when they see one getting stuck. It's funny. But as much as that mentality exists of more fear that the robots will steal our jobs and there won't be enough work for lawn contractors, that's an unlikely scenario. The majority of your sales would be to residential owners, not to contractors, even though you did mention you're getting a few contractors that are utilising these in their work. Yep. And the majority of those customers that are buying them off you, do you get any feedback whether they use a contractor to do gardening?
Yeah. And in general, there might be a couple of cases, but in general, they are going to be, and probably my main audience would be somebody who lives on about an acre or so, and they are just sick of mowing the lawn themselves. There's been very few cases, probably not even 5 cases of where somebody said, I'm going to get rid of my mowing bloke. Because there is always other work to do around the garden, but it's generally people who are either time poor, they want to go to the golf course, there can be weekenders where they only go to the property on a weekend and they don't want to spend all day Saturday mowing the lawn to catch up. They're predominantly the customers that we're getting.
And I'm guessing with customers that are up to an acre or in that sort of size, often there's that much work to do in the garden still that they would consider paying a contractor to come in and do the gardening and the edges.
Yes.
On top of having the robot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And look, not every, with robots, they're not going to generally, unless it was a perfect property, they're not going to do 100% of the lawn. There will always be little bits and pieces that are best off, might be too small, might be on a steep angle that someone will do, with a battery powered tool or petrol.
Yep.
And a contractor on a job like would sort of trim around the edges, do those sort of areas. But that then gives them more time, if they're not doing all the lawns, it gives them more time to work in the gardens and do those other tasks like you mentioned, like the weed spraying and
Well, that's sort of heading down the path of what Richard Hogan was doing, whereas he was specifically targeting existing customers to transition to having a robot look after their backyard. He would continue to do their gardens, their edges, and use a manual mower, either ride-on or a push mower, to do the roadside verge. So in that sense, that's a good position for a contractor to facilitate something like that, and works well either if the contractor owns a robotic mower where they look after a customer and it's a complete package, or where a customer asks them to do those extra jobs that the robot can't do.
Yep, absolutely.
So there's certainly a market for that. I still think at this point in time, 99% of contractors are not coming across robots at all in their line of work.
No, they're not. I mean, that's the thing. They're not really mainstream yet in the Australian marketplace. They're not like in Europe. Somebody was telling me, like in Europe, Western Europe, if you had a property that was 1 to 2 acres, you would never apparently consider going down to the mower shop and buying a ride-on mower. It would be you would go to the mower shop and say, what robot can do my job, my property? So yeah, we're nowhere near that. So
no, not at all. And I think there's a long way before we get to that point, market saturation.
Absolutely, oh yeah. But I mean, again, in Europe, they are very strict on their noise regulations, emissions.
Yeah.
They are more conscious of that. We have less of that sort of government sort of ruling on top of us and saying what we can and can't do, and when we, in terms of mowing and what equipment we use. So there's a lot more freedom here in that.
And this is very speculative, talking about politics, but let's do that for a second. I think the notion has been out there where 2030 was the goal to reduce carbon emissions, transfer to a lot more electric-powered vehicles and lawn mowing equipment, all those sorts of things across the world, not just in California. But 2030 was earmarked for a majority of vehicles being sold to be battery-powered, not fossil fuel-powered. I would say Australia, and even with American politics the way they've been at the moment, that's been pushed back a fair bit. Yep. And probably more realistically, it'll be a compromise where it's a case of going, let's try and manage a world where there's both of those things happening so that we get more of a balance rather than just skewed to one direction or the other.
Yeah, yep. And you see different technologies. I mean, I think hybrid vehicles make a lot of sense in Australia. Yeah. Because it does give you that extra range. You're not having that range anxiety. Where's my next charging station?
Hybrid's an interesting word to throw around for Australia because there's multiple different variations of hybrid when you're talking vehicles, but it's crept into our market as well. So you'll find within a car, you might have a hybrid that has a small electric engine and small battery that just assists the fuel-powered engine so that it reduces the amount of fuel it uses, through to like the new hybrids that are running electric motors everywhere, and they might have a petrol or diesel generator that charges the battery so that it is hybrid. We're seeing that with some Toro ride-ons, and I think there's a few other brands that have been moving towards that now, where you have a hybrid mower that has a fuel-powered engine and then a battery and charging system to also work in conjunction with each other.
Yep.
So,
I think if you can fit that into a compact unit, that does make a lot of sense from a contractor's point of view.
Yeah, I'd still like to see some nuclear-powered handheld equipment. Don't think we'll see it.
Not worrying about runtime then. full throttle for 80 years.
Yeah. And disposal of the waste could be interesting, but it's only a small, tiny amount of waste. But yeah, I think Australia, like you say, the hybrid market is much more interesting than full electric or full petrol. And in robotic mowers, I'm not sure where we'll see hybrid, but certainly across our industry, we will see hybrid tools.
Yep.
More in mowers than in handheld equipment, but yeah, interesting to see.
Yep. And I think what's going to drive a lot of that change towards robotics and battery tools is going to be the larger commercial customers. Some of the contractors I speak to, they're already getting that from, say, if they're pricing a tender to maintain a school, university campuses, that sort of thing. They are getting written in the contract that they've got to use battery tools, for example.
Yes.
And I don't think they're getting pushed to use robotics yet, but when they bring up the subject of robotics, then those facilities are pretty keen to go ahead with that because it offers, silent mowing, no disturbance to those people around.
And it meets a carbon emissions level.
Yep.
So yeah, I think the handheld battery tools are a no-brainer when it comes to that. The zero turns that are fully electric are suitable to council requirements where they've got a carbon emissions standard they're trying to meet, and they don't mind spending 2 or 3 times a regular petrol or diesel zero turn to get their battery one. For independent contractors, there's less of them that are going down that path. But like you say, if you're an independent chasing a school or a university, then yeah, you'll see it come up.
Yep, for sure. And I guess it's the same what we were discussing before with Crest, that yes, you are paying, thousands of dollars up front for battery gear and whatever, but you are purchasing your fuel essentially. Oh yes, you've still got to charge them, but that's not very expensive. But you're essentially purchasing your fuel and your servicing up front. So you're seeing that big initial cost, but then over the life of a 5-year life of a mower, it's actually balancing out, and you should end up in front.
And I think there's a big difference across brands when it comes to this, because if you're purchasing that up front, and let's pick on the servicing for a minute, some of the brands are not going to give you a 5-year lifespan without having some issues come up that mean you replace the tool. I've seen this with several tools where it's like, okay, 12 months in, the warranty's expired. There's an issue which is going to cost $200 or $300 to do a repair on a tool. You buy the new tool for $500 or $600 rather than spending $200 or $300 on a tool that's already between 1 and 2 years old, out of warranty.
Which gives me a chance to give Crest another shameless plug. 5-year warranty on their tools. So if your whippersnipper packs it in within 5 years, you're covered under warranty.
And yeah, I guess this is the point I'm making. Like if you're talking commercial quality tools, you would hope to get sort of 2 to 5 years out of a tool. But yeah, you do need to look closely with battery tools at the expected lifespan out of that tool and whether it's going to give you a service life with less servicing requirements than a petrol tool.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one that comes up because contractors will prefer a petrol tool a lot of the time because they're going, a battery tool is just not serviceable and means I'm going to have to replace a $600 tool.
Yeah, which isn't true. They are serviceable. We had throttle issues and different things on our steel whippersnippers, and we got them changed out pretty cheaply.
Yeah, that's good to know. And I guess that's what I'm saying. It comes back to where you place your money. Are you going to a big box tool store and buying a cheap, low-end commercial tool, which is not really commercial, or are you going to a mower shop, a dealer that looks after you and services their own equipment, and they're selling you one that is actually serviceable rather than disposable?
Yeah. No, definitely. You really need to do your sums when you're looking at buying new tools to make sure you're factoring all that sort of stuff in, and the initial sticker price up front is not always, it might be cheap up front, but doesn't mean it's going to be the cheapest tool to use over, say, a 5-year period.
Yeah, and full circle, bringing this background to the robotic mowers, there's a couple of brands of robotic mowers that are really designed to meet these commercial operators that are targeting universities, schools, sports grounds, and you'll find Husqvarna, Cress, a couple of other brands that are actually building robotic mowers that are capable of doing something the size of a sports field, maintaining it on the basis of mowing either 2 to 3 times a week or more frequently on a sports field so that it is kept as well or better than what a greenkeeper or a sports turf manager will keep it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep.
Have you thought about using a customer service app to manage your clients, your scheduling, your invoicing? If you haven't thought about this yet and you've got more than 5 customers, it's time you did. It will improve your efficiency in scheduling. It will improve your efficiency in invoicing. It will improve your efficiency if you have employees that are out doing the jobs for you. Visit sortscape.com/Aussie Lawn Stars to join up now. So it's a select market there, and I think it's been a tough one for robotic mowers to break into, where you're competing with the belief that you've got a professional with years of training, or can a robot actually take his job?
Mhm. Yeah. Then you've got when you're talking about that commercial market, then you look at, in the golf space, for example, there's solutions coming, or there are already solutions available in Australia where you can retrofit a John Deere, a Jacobson, your existing, gang cylinder mower with RTK technology and automate it.
Automated
So
machines, yeah.
yeah, so then you're not putting a little robotic mower like the Husqvarna Sciora, which is obviously a lot smaller than a big John Deere, onto that thing and expecting the same result, but you're actually just repurposing that existing mower that you already have. It might cost you $100,000. It still runs on diesel, whatever, but you can automate it. So you can send it out in the morning. It'll do its thing, and then you're still getting that same result that you're accustomed to.
And people probably haven't drawn that parallel, but if you look at John Deere, they've been doing this for years with tractors where they set up with GPS and autonomous driving.
Absolutely.
So that they can do perfectly straight lines when they're ploughing a field or harvesting or whatever they might need to do with those machines.
Yep.
That's become transferable from John Deere and other brands that are doing that. And this is where FJ Dynamics has come in, because that's been their specialty, hasn't it? Coming from an agricultural background with the RTK technology and entering the mowing market.
Yeah, they started off doing auto steers for tractors, and with a standard auto steer in a tractor, yes, you still need to have an operator in the seat. It's not fully robotic, but you are getting that efficiency, especially when you think about seeding, spraying, harvesting. You're not getting a human operator will swerve around a little bit. They won't be dead on millimeter accurate on every row up and down this 5,000 hectare field. So if you overlap by an extra 10 centimeters and use more seed or more spray or whatever, that's big dollars that's adding up to. So, and the same in mowing, if you overlap a bit too much every time, it's taking you longer to do that job. The autonomy is going to give you dead straight lines and maximum efficiency every time.
That's interesting, because when you're talking smaller RTK robotic mowers, the overlap is almost like 90% on some of the cut. So they do massive overlap so that they get the best cut possible. When you get to something like a Right ZK, or you're talking some of the, like what FJ Dynamics have been set up, where they've come from an agricultural background, they have put a lot of effort in to go, okay, let's maximize the amount of cut width that we can do with a machine that is capable of cutting using diesel power, petrol power, all those sorts of things. And it's a different game compared to a small residential robot that's let's do different.
Efficiency isn't going to if your efficiency is out by 10 or 20%, it's not going to really cost you anything more, like in the big scale agriculture.
Yeah. So, and I think that's where listeners that are looking at doing larger commercial jobs will start going, okay, this could be interesting. Can I have a machine that lives on one commercial site where I'm there all the time anyway, or an employee is there all the time anyway, and they're responsible for making sure that the right ZK Autonomous, the FJ Dynamics, the Cress, whatever it is that's designed to live on one place and do predominantly that, keep it looking spectacular. You got an employee there doing the gardening, checking on the robot. There's a big place for that. Cress is one of those brands which is targeting that. I think, like I said, Husqvarna with their Sciora targets sports fields predominantly, or golf courses.
Yep.
And we will have listeners that are doing that sort of work.
Yep, absolutely. Cress have also just recently introduced announced in the US their new large series of mowers. So I think it's a 48-inch and a 60-inch deck.
That's getting up there.
Yeah, so I think we should see them in Australia late 2026, end of next year.
Yeah, okay.
But they are going to be aimed squarely at the contractor market who is doing repeat work of acreage work, whatever, that they can set up their maps, trailer the mower around like you do with the traditional ride-on. But send it off on, and then you can whipper and hedge and do your weeding or whatever, or the mower mows. So there's a lot coming in this space. Like the amount of change we've seen in the last 18 months, 2 years, it's crazy, but it's not slowing down.
No, it's definitely not slowing down. The technology is advancing. The opportunities for these machines to work in conjunction with a commercial contractor that's bidding on large contracts is certainly interesting in that space.
Yep, absolutely. And like we said before, we're not about taking jobs. It's especially when you speak to the larger contractors and businesses in general, they're struggling to find good, reliable employees. And if they can put in a robot that is going to be there consistently, mowing the lawn X amount of times per week, that then allows they can focus on their core staff, that they can train up and they can do the higher skilled tasks. And they're not relying on those lower, fulfilling roles to keep those lower skilled tasks like mowing going for the customer.
Yeah. So I think given the current market, you'll have small contractors that are going, well, can I implement this on a residential lawn? And the short answer is higher end residential customers could be interesting to do that. And small commercial jobs, you can get a robotic mower that will live in one place for as low as $2,000 that does the same area regularly and does a really good job of it.
Yep.
So there is a place for that for people who are going, can I do this? And you got to do the maths and work out how much you make from a customer, and is it beneficial to have a robot working in there rather than you doing the mowing?
Yep.
But more and more that becomes interesting as you grow from that. So the $2,000 mower will do around 500 square meters of lawn regularly maintained. And then upwards from there. So as you go into larger commercial areas where you might have a sports field or just an area that's a nice area for employees to have their lunch break, those sorts of things, that's where people looking at maintaining those jobs will go, oh yeah, maybe I could put a robot there. I can tell you for a fact, employees like it when they are out of their office or wherever they are and they see a robot mower maintaining a lawn. That's fascinating for them, but it's also, it gives them a sense of pride of going, well, these gardens and lawns are being maintained exceptionally well, and that's a talking point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. No, generally, people are interested in robots. They love following them around, seeing what they do.
Yep. The thought that an employee might pick one up and take it home has crossed a lot of minds.
Yeah, again, anybody that knows even a little bit about robotic mowers knows that that's not a viable option. Picking up a robot mower and taking it home it's not going to work for you at home. So
no. And there's several factors coming there in terms of the technology, but just the simple fact, if you're an employee working for a company, you probably don't want to get accused of theft.
That would be a factor, yep. And in 2.5 years of business now, I've only had one customer who's had their mower stolen. So that as much as it gets raised as possibly likely, but out of 400 or 500 mowers I've sold, to have one stolen, that's a low percentage.
The factor that comes to mind for me, and obviously you're doing a lot more work with robots than I am, but the factor that comes to mind with me is that initially when you think about installing a robotic mower or can my customer have a robotic mower that will work for them, you're unlikely to put a robotic mower in a public place or a roadside.
Yeah, yes and no. I run my mower out on my nature strip.
There are times where it's feasible to do it, but I've got a robotic mower that's operating on my dad's property, and it has enough problems with cars coming and going on the driveway inside the property, let alone if I was to put it out beside the roadside where people often will park off the road onto his grass. So it's a clear case of going, it's not suitable for doing the roadside verge, and there's a little bit of a slope there too, which means potential for it to end up stuck on the road is a possibility.
Yeah. That's right. And that comes down to assessing the property and working out, rather than saying, oh, this robot has to do 100% of the lawns. Yes, you could map that and then end up with a lot of problems. If you're happy to accept 80%, you'll be problem free. And
And that is the case, particularly for commercial properties. You end up looking at a commercial property and going, okay, if a robot can manage part of the lawn, that's a
Yeah.
win. It reduces the amount of time I spend on that property, and it reduces the labour, which is a bigger cost than the machinery a lot of the time. So that's where commercial premises that do have public-facing component, it's often better not to use that roadside verge or the high traffic area, high foot traffic areas.
Yep.
They're less likely to be suitable for a robot.
Yep, absolutely. Just thinking back, we did a trial with a large commercial contractor recently at a private school, and the school was a little bit sort of challenged in their budget. So there was an area near the front of the school beside the car park, which the contractor was only mowing once a month as part of their contract. And obviously, you can imagine in Sydney, Kikuyu and a mix of grasses mown once a month doesn't look very neat. So we did a trial there with the Crest robot, which was mowing the sports field several times a week, and then was the overflow time was mowing this front area, and everybody was just blown away. And it just improved the whole quality of the look of the school.
Yeah,
for no extra cost. This lawn, this area that was getting previously cut once a month was now getting cut 3 times a week.
Now, that's interesting for a school, because what you've got in a school or a university is you've got the need to be able to cut the grass at a time which is convenient, and not got people playing on the sports field, or not got a lot of foot traffic walking through that particular area that's near the car park or whatever. So you can set a robotic mower to mow at night time, or to mow early in the morning, or in their lunch break, all those different options you've got, so that you can maximize the amount of time it spends mowing while there's less people around.
Correct. That's what we did on that one. It started 4 p.m. every afternoon. It would go out, and it was back on its base by 7:30 a.m.
That's also another factor which comes up there. If you have a person coming into the school to do that, and you probably still have a person coming in anyway to do some gardening or do the edges or whatever, but the more work that is done by a robot, the less issues you have with concerns around police checks and working with children checks.
Yep. And just general disturbance. If with this contractor, they would mow the sports field every week. So that's when the kids are in class. There's a ride-on mower running around outside the classrooms, having to be managed in between recess, lunchtime, class PE and all that sort of thing. So you take that whole factor out of it, and the kids turn up at school in the morning, and the sports field's been cut and looking nice and neat and ready to play on.
Yeah. And I think about schools that are local to me, where they have a maintenance team that will run around the school, and they work odd hours so that they're interfering less and less at times when school is in. So they'll be out there at the crack of dawn doing the lawns that are in front of the admin, in front of the school entries, around the car parks, all those sorts of things. And they'll work flat out for a couple of hours, and then they'll disappear so that they're not there when students are coming and going, parents are coming and going, and then they might do a bit more work between start of school and lunch, and then they try and disappear again. So they're out of the way, and they might be out doing the back oval or something when it's not being used. But they'd literally have to work their work hours so that their interactions with the school are as minimal as possible.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So robotics definitely gives you that optionality that you can increase your work hours without increasing the disturbance to the neighbours, even noise levels, you're not creating any noise for the neighbours, so you can mow at night.
Yep. Yeah. So it's one way of making sure things get maintained regularly.
Yeah. And it's also a factor that's affecting a lot of golf courses. Very similar, the greenkeepers will be out early in the morning. They've got to blow off the greens before they can mow them, that sort of thing. And, with increasing residential areas encroaching on golf courses, then they start getting noise complaints, and battery tools, robotics are assisting them to get their jobs done to a very high standard, but not affecting the surrounding suburbs.
Now, golf courses are a real interesting one there, because unlike a lot of areas, your foot traffic on a golf course can be at sunrise. That's when a lot of people are out there playing golf. It's the moment the sun's up, they want to be on that golf course. So it's a challenging one for a greenkeeper to try and keep up with that.
It is.
So that would make a massive difference for them to be able to have a silent, autonomous robot out there doing some of the work
Yep.
previous to that.
Yep. And from what I've seen in the States, for example, where the robotics are really getting into the golf, people are very used to, say, having a robot running up and down the fairway while they're playing golf.
Yeah, interesting.
It's not even that, the thing can only work at night when there's no golf. People are just getting accustomed to, yep, there's a robot running around. We'll drive around it. They've obviously got rules in place for if they were to, the ball was to land in the golf on the robot and bounce away or whatever. How they treat that, I'm not sure, but from what I'm told, that's becoming quite commonplace. That you're out golfing and you're just working, you're playing in between the robots.
Now, that's an interesting one you just brought up. If you've got a robot out there on the fairway, I know for a fact there are some robot mowers for golf courses that are using reels, so reel mowers, cylinder mowers. They will not handle a golf ball.
No.
And those areas need to be cleared of any balls before they're cut with that robot. And I think Echo is probably the only brand that comes to mind has a ball collector, a robotic ball collector.
Yeah, there are other brands nowadays, but specifically for driving ranges, it's not. You don't need to collect balls on a golf course as such. It's the driving range where the collection happens.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
On a golf course, you're going down the 9th hole. If there's a ball there, that's because somebody's hit it there, and if you go and pick it up, they're going to get angry at you.
Yes, definitely. But yeah, that is something that would come up. So there are various different robotic mowers that will operate fairway areas, or probably not going to see them on the green so much, but on the fairways, I think some of them will still be rotary mowers rather than cylinder mowers. Yeah.
But that's where you have your existing John Deeres and your Jacobsons, those large commercial mowers where they can be fitted with autonomy.
Yep.
I imagine they would still be working before the golfers start.
Yep.
It's more your smaller robots like your Sioras, your Echoes, your Cresses that have golf ball deflectors and attachments fitted that they can still work even when there are golf balls on the fairway.
Yeah, and they are designed to deal with all those issues. They're designed to give an exceptional cut from a rotary mower.
Yeah. So having a look. Oh. As you may know, I'm in the RFS and we just got paged to a car accident.
Okay. Yeah, the weather in New South Wales at the moment has been horrendous. The amount of rainfall we've had. Some of the areas north of me this week had upwards of 280 mils in 24 hours, I think.
Yeah, well, Taree is over 500 mils out of this rain event so far. So
yeah, it's not a nice situation to be in. A lot of flooding.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Dirk, I think we've given people really good insight into this topic that comes with the wisdom and experience of a few years working with robots.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's like we said, it's a very rapidly developing technology. When we last spoke around 2 years ago, RTK technology hadn't even arrived. Everything was talk about wires, random cuts. So if you had asked me where we're going to be in the next 2 years, I'd say I don't really know. But obviously, we're moving along at a rapid pace. I mean, there's just to touch on some of the technologies we're seeing. Obviously, AI cameras are increasingly being used on these robotic mowers, which assist them. To mention, say, for example, the Momotion Luba and the Yuka products. And I tested this yesterday. Their new products with their AI cameras, even if there is no RTK signal at all, can travel for about 300 meters before they'll actually stop working.
Okay.
So I was doing a demo for a customer yesterday. We mapped an area of his lawn, got the mower out. It did its border cut. It was doing its pattern mowing, and then I went and unplugged the power supply for the RTK, and this thing just kept on going up and down in its path. Started to get a little bit wavy, but just kept going, and I gave up waiting in the end. We probably let it go for 5 minutes, and then I was like, all right, I'll plug it back in again. But yeah.
That is interesting, because my first question there is if it doesn't have GPS signal to give you a definite locked-in position, and it just keeps on going. It could end up in a dam, it could end up on the road, it could end up lost in some trees or who knows where. But it sounds like it was actually sticking to its mapped area really well and actually
it was
identifying.
turning on those borders, and we had just mapped an area in the middle of his lawn. We weren't even near the edges.
Yeah.
It knew where it had to be. And
That's
again, that
good.
AI camera will kick in if there is an obstacle, a tree or a dam or whatever. That should kick in and recognise that isn't lawn. I'm not going there.
AI is getting better. I know it struggles with counting fingers and toes, but overall, it's doing like in this sort of situation. It looks like it's improved out of sight.
Absolutely, because I mean, early RTK models, yes, as soon as the mower went under a tree, it did. It could stop and sit there for a while trying to pick up a signal. But now we're getting to the stage where, they've got all these technologies. There's VSLAM coming. They've got LiDAR, different technologies that different manufacturers are using. So even if 2 years ago when RTK first came out, we would say, it's not suitable for a property that's got a lot of trees. Well, that's not the case anymore because they work fine under trees.
Yeah, that's great. So wrapping up this interview, one of the things I think people are going to be asking is how much is a robotic mower? And I'm going to throw a little bit of shade here and say it depends on the quality of the brand. So you sell a few different brands, but I'm just thinking in terms of reliability and which brands have been in the industry the longest. Husqvarna has been around the longest. Their pricing also reflects a slightly higher price for the same size that it will handle. So they typically measure robots by how much area they will mow and maintain. So Husqvarna is going to come in at a little bit of a premium. They've been around the longest. They expect that premium, as much as double of some of the other brands. But if you're comparing different brands that you sell, that's probably better to stick to. You don't actually sell Husqvarna, just so that people understand that. But your base price for an RTK robot, we mentioned before, around that $2,000 mark.
Even less. Momotion now, the two-wheel drive mower for 600 square meters, you're talking $1,500.
Yeah, wow.
Including your reference station. A Segway, you're talking around the $2,000 mark for 500 square meters.
Would you compare Segway and Momotion as comparable in terms of quality? Like you're pretty happy with customers' feedback on those models?
I would put Segway ahead of Momotion in terms of reliability. We've had very few problems with Segway.
But obviously you sell Momotion and you back them, and you're not saying they're rubbish. Don't buy them.
No, that's right. They are a brand. But if I was choosing for my own lawn at home, knowing what I know, I would choose a Segway. But Momotion are a great brand, but they're only a young company. They've only been around for 2.5 odd years, still learning a lot. Whereas Segway have got that long history of electronics going back to the Segways that we all know, the two-wheeled people transporters.
Yeah, and I think that's relevant. But by comparison, you'll find Momotion has more options in terms of a mower that is all-wheel drive or various different things that they might do slightly different to a Segway. So not trying to throw any brand under the bus, but they do have some quality differences there. And again, when you're paying for a mower that is capable, you're jumping up in price range quite a bit when you move to Cress, which is aimed at a different market. So your Segways and your Momotions are going to hit that residential market, the lower end prices really well, and the mid-range market very well. Cress is going to be higher end, more targeted at commercial or large acreage properties.
There is a small Cress coming out for up to 1,000 square meters. Will be very attractively priced in our market. However, it will still require dealer install, so it's not an item you can just buy online and install yourself.
But I'm guessing a dealer install on that is not going to be terribly expensive, so it still remains quite competitively priced.
The advantage with Cress is you don't need to set up a reference station on your property because it's a networked RTK, so they are quite different from the other brands. So it is literally just a mower and a charging station on your property.
That is a big advantage in some ways, and it does limit the amount of areas where that will actually work. So if you're talking metropolitan areas, you'll find it'll work most metropolitan areas.
Correct. if you're out in the regions, yes, that can be a problem. It does, however, for commercial contractors, it does increase the portability of them because they can have multiple maps. And a smaller yard could be moved. The runtime isn't really there for allowing you to do multiple jobs in a day, but you do have that portability there.
Yeah, look, that's an interesting one because that'll come up on occasion. I've found this with doing some test runs with a Segway, and you're talking about Crest, just to be clear, in terms of having those multiple maps in there. What I found with a Segway demo is I could set it up to do, so say it's capable of doing 3,000 square meters. The Segway H series has one that's aimed at that market. Ideally, it's doing less than 3,000 square meters. But what I did is I programmed it to have a main area that it looked after, which was around the sort of 1,500 square meter mark. And then I had an extra area that it was mapped for, but wasn't doing all of the time. And I would just tell it to go and do that periodically. So the reasoning for my decision there is I had another robot doing that area, but occasionally it would be getting serviced. I'd get the Segway to go and do that area. And it could manage just switching between its regular map and taking on that area fairly easily. But Crest is designed with that sort of thing in mind, where it can easily have a map switched on or switch it off, tell it to do another map, and away it goes, ready to go.
Yep. Yeah,
I think
you can
that's
have
relevant.
multiple maps set up in the app that you just turn on and off.
I think that's relevant more in commercial space where you might have 3 or 4 robots that look after a commercial property, and you might go, okay, this one's programmed to look after the front lawn, that one's programmed to look after around the car park, this one's programmed to look after around the swimming pool areas, but they can all have all of the maps in them, and you can rotate them between the areas if you've got one down and move another one in.
Yep. Or for example, if you've got another site, it's winter time, they don't need to be mowing as much. You could move 1 or 2 of them to the other site.
Yeah.
And you could have, the robots running across those 2 sites for the winter time when they're only having to mow once a week.
Yeah. Reduced workload, but managing more.
Yep. And that's one of the changes or one of the technologies that's coming, which will interest commercial contractors more, is drop and go, as they call it. So robotic mowers that can have multiple maps saved in them that have a decent amount of runtime. We're talking, 5-6 hours, or hot swap batteries that you can easily just pull the battery out, put a new one in, send it back out. That is definitely a technology that is going to advance rapidly in the next sort of 12 to 24 months.
So just to be clear, there's a massive difference between a robot that is designed to do 3 to 7 cuts a week, where the load on the motors is almost zero, and therefore the runtime out of a small battery gets a really fantastic result, and a robot that is designed to run off fuel, or it has a really big battery in it, and it's designed to be able to take a higher load on the motors and be brought in, like you say, drop and go. So it might be there once a week or something like that. And by comparison, your residential size robotic mower that mows 3 to 7 times a week might weigh 10 kilos. A robot that's got a big battery in it and is designed to be drop and go once a week, it might weigh 50, 60 kilos, like a traditional Honda HRU 216.
Yep, absolutely. Obviously, everything needs to be beefed up. It needs to have the stronger cutting motors, and the extra battery power to be able to run for longer, and B, to be able to get through that longer grass.
Now,
for sure.
I keep thinking of the FJ Dynamics with their 21-inch robot that they've already got out on the market, and going, well, that kind of looks like it. Sorry?
Yeah, 25-inch.
25-inch, sorry.
Yeah, that is suitable as well. That you could do that, definitely. At the moment, we're sort of selling it on the large commercial sites because it is autonomous, that they can just run it 24/7. We haven't really gone down that route yet with that mower of offering it as a sort of a drop and go.
Yeah, well, all of the FJ Dynamics look sort of like the right ZK autonomous in terms they look like they are built beefier, like they can handle cutting grass once a week or maybe once a fortnight.
Yep. Sure.
I don't like fortnightly cuts for any maintenance,
No.
but anyway, if you say once a week and you go, okay, can it manage it, and its battery is not going to suffer really short run times because of it, then I think what I understand, the FJ Dynamics are not ideally cut out for drop and go in that sense of moving them between a job every day.
No.
But they're heading that direction. But yes, you're saying there's another brand coming which is designed specifically for that.
Correct. Yep. It gives you the option of having it working off a charger, or you can literally run it drop and go and just charge it up back at your shed at night. So there are some companies in the States that are already using it, where literally the contractor has a trailer load of them, goes and drops them off on the sites in the morning, comes back mid to late afternoon, picks them up, brings them back to their base and charges them up.
So they could literally drop it, leave it, come back, pick it up, or they might drop a maintenance team at the same site, move on to the next site, drop a mower and a team, and do 3 to however many sites they can fit in one day with as many mowers and maintenance teams as they want.
Yep. And the idea with those mowers is they will work together as a fleet. So what we were saying before about robotic mowers, where they're not really designed to be, take it to a job because of how long it takes. With these mowers, you would say, for example, drop 5 of these mowers on this property, and they would all work together. They would each know they each know where they've worked, where they need to go, and they'll work together to get that job done in a much quicker period of time.
Can we name drop the brand?
Yeah, it's called URS Bot, or Nextmo. Is sort of their general brand they trade under. I've had some discussions with them. There is a couple of guys in Melbourne that are talking about bringing some in.
Yeah, okay.
Start doing some testing under Australian conditions. So that will be coming.
It'll be interesting. And I guess the next thing everyone's going to ask is, how's the cost comparison on those compared to somebody who's using a 21-inch walk-behind mower or a ride-on mower? Because those are the real costs people are looking at with maintenance businesses.
Yeah, that I'm told they're priced pretty attractively. But again, it will depend. That you will be looking at that higher end, probably more commercial market. It won't be a case of your $50 mow blow go. It wouldn't work out on a job like that. But on the higher end jobs or your commercial sites that you're visiting once or twice a week, they would definitely work well there.
So people starting a business, cowboys, slash and dash, blow and go, mow blow go, those sorts of businesses probably not going to jump in on that market.
No, absolutely not. No.
But if that's where they're starting their business, then there's some goals is to look at where they want to be, and do they want to be tackling that end of the market?
Absolutely, yeah. There is definitely a market for it.
Yeah, well, that sounds like it'll be interesting to start Googling or come back into his time and talk about what progress has been made there.
Yep. And then just while we're still talking, FJ Dynamics robotic line markers is something that may interest some of the commercial contractors.
Yeah,
those
definitely.
guys who are looking after sports fields, schools. There are now robotic line markers that will mark out a full-size soccer field in around 35, 40 minutes.
Yep.
Literally, once you've mapped it, it's just a case of fill the drum with paint, press go, it does its thing. Once it's done, you bring it back, clean it out, and put it back in the shed until the following week, or take it to the next job.
Now, you and I have talked about this before we started recording. I think it's important for people who are doing that work. These machines are price effective when you are doing multiple sports fields. If you've just got it on one sports field, you might find it's a little bit prohibitive on the cost.
Yep, you would really have to hate line marking to get one. We're talking an entry price of around $29,500.
Yeah.
It's a robot that will mark 3 or 4 full-size fields on one battery charge, but it will drastically reduce your line marking time. So one of the sports clubs, the soccer club down the road from me, where they're letting me do some testing, if they're marking all 3 fields, the president tells me it's probably about a 6-hour day for him to mark out all his fields. We can bring that down to under 2 hours.
So if you're in a capital city in Australia or New Zealand and you've got a name for looking after sports fields, being a sports turf manager, that sort of thing, and you might consider a business venture where you offer line marking for several fields in one city, and it might be, if they want them marked regularly, that could be a good profitable business model.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. It'd sure beat all of the labour that's involved in doing it without that.
No, it's very labour, especially the setup. What I'm learning is the setup at the start of a season for someone to go around with string lines and pegs and mark up, make sure the field is square. You avoid all that because once your field is marked and you've saved your map, you can go there year after year and your field will be identical to what you did the previous year.
It sounds like you're stating the obvious, but you can't overstate that enough, is that the actual setup expense of getting a field marked correctly, string lines, the labour that's involved in that, by comparison, like you say, having an electronic map of that field, GPS accurate. And when we say GPS accurate, RTK GPS, when they are set up and they are exact, they're down to about 1 centimetre accuracy.
Yep.
And it repeats that over and over again every time.
It does. Yep. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a game changer in that regard, isn't it? Because it is a very labour-intensive focus process.
It is. Yep. Very detailed. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's some of the. We're not, robotics is not only about mowing, but we've got the line marking. There is, it's same as we're seeing with agriculture with drone technology for spraying, fertilizing. All that is going to filter down into the robotic, market for contractors.
And speculative at the moment, but I think contractors who are worried the robots are going to take our jobs, they start going, oh, when a robot can do the edges or when a robot can do the hedge trimming. And these are interesting fields that people are looking at, but we're not there yet. We're not seeing robots take our jobs. And these are going to be priced for people who are doing regular large maintenance work. It's not going to be your homeowners, your residential jobs, unless they're really high end. So there's still a big gap there. I think there's also a gap there when it comes to some of the other services people do. So I know I've seen, for agricultural purposes, robotic components when it comes to weed spraying, things like that. So you might have a boom sprayer behind a tractor that uses some autonomous features to identify weeds. So it just spot sprays Roundup on the weeds and leaves the rest of the field so that they work really well.
Yep, and that's all the development of AI that's making all that possible.
Yeah, so there are advances and there are components where you might go, oh yeah, robots could take our jobs, but most of those are fairly slow advances, or they're in an area where it makes a lot of sense for a robot to work in conjunction with a human, or the human simply doesn't want to do that type of work.
Yep. And you always need somebody to look after the robot. Somebody's got to fill it up. Somebody's got to clean it. Somebody's got to update the firmware on it. So it's more, you become more of a technical role rather than just a hands-on labouring role.
Yeah. So I guess it'll be interesting to see, like we said, in the time since our last interview, RTK GPS has made huge advances that we didn't expect to happen in that time frame. Other things will surprise us yet.
They will, for sure. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Dirk, thanks for joining me again. And it sounds like we might need to make this a regular thing, come back every now and then and give an update.
Yeah, no, happy to.
No worries. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Gary. Great chatting to you.
Thank you for listening to Aussie Lawn Stars. Please remember to rate and review the show on the Apple Podcasts app or the player you use. Exciting new shows are released every Monday. Make sure you follow or subscribe to hear the next episode.